So in this video, I'm going to talk about geometric isomers and how we identify them. So the first thing to remember is that when you're going through the flow chart, we don't just say, oh, I'm going to start down here with geometric isomers because I see a double bond or a ring. First, you have to go through, is this an isomer? Does it have the same chemical formula? To see if it fits under the rules of conformational or structural isomers. If both of those are no, then we move on to looking at, is this possibly a geometric isomer? So we have to have a double bond or a ring to have a geometric isomer, but the presence of a double bond or a ring doesn't guarantee that it is a geometric isomer. So we're going to look through some examples. I've got some models built so that we can talk about what's going on. So let's first look at a molecule where we don't have a geometric isomer, and that's where we have all single bonds. Because when we look at this, notice that the molecule can rotate freely. So if I look at my red atom and blue atom, what I see is that the orientation could be here, it could turn and be here, so there's nothing that locks it into place. And so that's why we don't even worry about a geometric isomer when we're dealing with something with only these single bonds. It doesn't have a double bond, doesn't have a ring. So we see free rotation, so we don't have any orientation issues locked in there. Then we're going to look at something with a double bond. So once we see the double bond in there, we see that we're locked. I can no longer have that free rotation like I had in the single bond. What I see is that this double bond stops that rotation and doesn't allow these molecules to move. So when I look at this molecule, I have my double bond there. We're locked into this orientation. I can see the white atoms here. They're going to represent my hydrogen atoms, and the red and green are just representing some other group or atom. So it could be halogens, it could be a methyl group like CH3, so it could be lots of different things, but the point is they're not hydrogens, and these two are hydrogens. And so when I look at this, I see my double bond has got my molecule locked into this orientation, and I see that I've got my groups that are on opposite sides. So this would actually be a trans geometric isomer because we got them on opposite sides. If I were to have my groups, so if I were to switch these, okay, now when I'm looking at this version of the molecule, what I see is I've got a cis because my hydrogens are on the same side and my two other groups, whatever they may be, are on the same side of the double bond. I'm always looking at what's on one carbon and the other carbon. I never compare and say, well, these are trans to one another. I'm always looking across the double bond. I'm also not looking at what's going on elsewhere in the molecule. So if we had, another group out here, so say I'm looking at just my double bond here, okay, so my double bond is right here, and I see I've got all this other stuff in the molecule, I'm still only worried about what's going on around the double bond. So I can see I have my hydrogens are still on the same side, I'm still dealing with cis. It doesn't matter what's going on with the rest of the molecule, it's only what is attached to the carbons involved in the double bond. Okay. So, again, we have our cis. Okay, if I were to flip these, I have trans, I'm locked into place, so I'm not going to see that free rotation like with single bonds. Now let's look at an example where we have a double bond, but we don't have a geometric isomer. So here we have our double bond, so it locks us into place. We have our hydrogen atom here, we have some group here, and we have groups over here. And these green atoms both represent the same group. Again, it doesn't matter what group they are, but what matters is that they're the same. Now, when I look at this, I see that I have my locked in orientation. Okay. But notice that I can't describe this as cis or trans, because if I was describing it relative to the blue atom here, whatever this group is, I'd say, well, this atom is cis to it, but this is trans to it. And so if I can't describe it as cis or trans, but I can describe it as both, then it's actually going to be neither. And when we think about this, if this were to switch, if so the positioning of my green atoms were to switch, okay, which we can't tell the difference because we'd still have the green group down up here and the green group down here. So we can't have a geometric isomer when the two groups attached to one of the carbon atoms are exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether they're both hydrogen atoms, both CH3 groups, both chlorines, doesn't matter. If these two groups attached to the single carbon atom here are the same, then we're not going to have a geometric isomer. Okay, so that's the first thing I have to look at. Okay, so not the same. Or they are the same, so not geometric isomers, excuse me, right? So the next option we look at is when we're dealing with the ring structure. So I've got a molecule here, so we've got 5 carbons in our ring, and then we have hydrogen atoms here, the white atoms, and then we have a green group and a pink group. And so again, they just represent something other than hydrogen, and they're different colors. They could be the same group, they could be different groups. In this case, it doesn't matter. But just like with the double bond, when I have my ring structure, I'm now locked into place. I can wiggle a little bit, but I can't have that free rotation like I do with a single bond like I had here. I don't have I don't have the free rotation that was happening with my linear structure. So here, okay, we're locked into that orientation just like when we had the double bond. Notice, let me try to get this with the plane here. So when I look at this molecule, I kind of see the ring is in the plane, so it's flat, and notice there are atoms coming up and atoms coming down. And so when I'm talking about cis and trans, what I'm actually looking at is which side of the ring things are on. So in this case, I would describe this as trans because I have one of my non-hydrogen groups on the bottom coming down and one of my non-hydrogen groups on the top, so sticking up. So if they're on opposite sides of the ring, then we know we have a geometric isomer. Sometimes this is drawn, it just shows there are two groups attached. It doesn't show whether they're going down or up, but the question is asking which one can have a geometric isomer. So if it shows two non-hydrogen groups anywhere on the ring, then we can describe it as cis or trans. If I only have one non-hydrogen group, so if I only have one non-hydrogen groups, I can no longer describe this as cis or trans because I have nothing to compare this one to. And if I try to compare this hydrogen, well, let's say it's cis to a bunch and it's trans to a bunch, so I can't describe it as either one. So I have to have two non-hydrogen groups, okay, on the molecule. They can be the same or they could be different. So if these were both the same group, okay, I still have two non-hydrogen groups on my ring, so I can describe this as trans because they're on opposite sides, or if these were flipped, then I can describe it as cis. Okay. Something different about the ring structure than we look at the double bond. So for the double bond, we worry about what's attached to the carbons involved in the double bond. For our ring structure, it just matters anywhere on the ring because the whole structure is kind of locked, so we can't have that rotation like we have with our single bonds. So in this case, the atoms are not, okay, the non-hydrogen atoms are not on neighboring carbons. They could be, okay. So I could switch these around, okay. And what I see is that we're still dealing with a trans orientation because we have the two non-hydrogen groups on opposite sides of the ring. So one pointing up and one pointing down. Note that the questions a lot of times will ask, is a geometric isomer possible? Not actually asking you to identify which geometric isomer. So a couple of things to note is when you're looking at a single molecule, you can say, can this have another version? And then sometimes you're given two molecules and say, are these isomers of one another? So you got to read the question carefully and see what's being asked for. Okay. So hopefully this will help distinguish between when we have a geometric isomer and when we don't. The most common misconception students deal with is one, just because it has a double bond doesn't necessarily make it geometric. It has the possibility of being geometric. And when the groups are the same, okay, when I have two groups attached to the same carbon that are exactly the same, whether they're hydrogens, chlorines, fluorines, methyl groups, CH3 groups, ethyl groups, no matter how big they are, if these two groups are exactly the same on with the carbon in the double bond, then we cannot have a geometric isomer because if I flip these, I'd still have the same groups on those two positions.